Hello and welcome. I've come today to Edinburgh in Scotland to meet Archbishop Leo Cushley, who's the Archbishop of the Diocese of St Andrews in Edinburgh. Archbishop Leo, welcome to EWTN.
Thank you.
Archbishop Leo, as you know, I'm going around Great Britain and speaking to bishops across the country about the issues that they feel the Church is confronting today and also some of the solutions to those issues.
Yes.
And if we could start by looking at what you consider to be the most pressing issue facing the Church today.
Well, there are many pressing issues. Every time I look out the window, there is another pressing issue. But one of the issues that I think is worth spending time on, and in fact essential to my own ministry and my own sense of what the Church requires today, is to reach out to our young people.
Yes.
And young people for me broadly means 16 to 29, give or take, maybe into people in their early 30s, that kind of age group, because as far as I can see, Kevin, the Church not only is theirs tomorrow, it's theirs today already.
Yes.
And I need to find a way to let them understand that and to grasp that and to make the Church their own. They also need guided, they also need some guidance, the importance of them being guided to understand that they have this wonderful role, they have this wonderful opportunity to live the gospel wherever they may be. As St Francis de Sales said, you don't expect a bishop to live it like a baker or a baker to live it like a bishop. We all have our roles and we all have our different ways of living the faith and expressing ourselves and being that leaven in society. And our young people could be doing that too.
Could I ask Archbishop Leo, because people will be watching this maybe thinking, well, what does an archbishop know or understand of young people today in this diocese? I mean, what sort of ways do you interact with young people?
Well, 30 years ago, when I was a young priest, I worked in 3 different high schools as a chaplain, and it was an important part of my own training and experience as a priest. I was still a young man at that point, and I got to see the importance of that. Little did I know that it would fall to me as a leader in the Church later on to be using some of that experience. But it seems to me that there is a great untapped well of enthusiasm for the faith. So what I've been doing in this archdiocese is I've created a thing that we call the Youth Initiative, and it is a way of getting our younger priests involved with our young people, so that it's not just young people talking to young people, it's leading, it's guiding our young people to a better, a deeper knowledge of their faith, but they also get to meet each other and listen to each other and be encouraged by each other. So, for example, during Lent and during Advent, I always personally hold a series of talks that I give with an opportunity for some discussion, a little bit of quiet prayer time before the Blessed Sacrament, also with confessions during that. And then after that, a slice of half-decent pizza so that we can talk to each other. Yes. And it's a very simple formula, but it has worked quite well to my mind over the last couple of years that I've been doing it. And I have to say I love doing it. I'm very encouraged by the young people who come to these talks.
Well, would you say, Archbishop Leo, though, that your experience in the high schools some decades earlier, the challenges for young people and the environment in which they were growing up is remarkably different to the environment today? Yes. What would you say are the greater challenges to the youth today?
Yes, there are much greater challenges to the young people. In my day, 30 years ago, there wasn't the prevalence of drugs.
Yes.
There wasn't the internet, so there wasn't the threat of pornography, of the abuse that can bring. Our young people are no more mature than they were. Those today are no more mature than those of 30 years ago.
Right.
But they know more.
Yes.
They're exposed to a lot more, and so they need more help.
Yes.
It is extraordinary to me how good the young people of today remain in spite of the panoply of temptations and difficulties and possibilities put before them by our libertine society. And so I'm impressed by them and by their interest in the faith and their curiosity about the person of Jesus Christ and about the sacraments and about the Eucharist, that they've still got that in spite of everything that our society can throw at them today.
That's a consoling thought, surely, as a pastor, that human nature doesn't change.
No.
But perhaps there is a greater prevalence of certain types of temptation or what have you, especially social media, where people are being trolled or abused. In young people, that has adolescents in particular has an impact. But it's consoling to think that maybe the challenge is exactly the same as it was a generation or two ago. You know that, but what you're also suggesting, and from your own pastoral experience, is that the witness and the goodness of youth and the idealism and the energy is still there.
It's still there.
It's not dumbed down by what we have.
No, not at all. And it was a great insight of St John Paul II to do that and to get the World Youth Day up and running. While I was still a student in Rome in the 80s, we got to see the start of this and we wondered what was going on, and it seemed, what is this? Is that a flash in the pan? And we were curious, but we were all waiting to see what was going to happen. And now, of course, it is an enormous event every few years where the young people gather around the person of the successor of Peter and are encouraged in their faith by him, by each other, by the bishops and the priests and the sisters and everyone that's there to encourage them. It's a wonderful example of something that's one of these great ideas where we all wonder, why did we never think of this before?
Yes.
And I've been able to participate in a couple of these events, and we tried to do something similar here at the national level in Scotland. To give you one example, just in August 2019, at the end of the month, we got together the young Catholics of Scotland, and we went on pilgrimage to St Andrews. And there are the remnants of a medieval cathedral that was the biggest building in medieval Scotland. Wow. And there's just traces of it now. But for the first time that I'm aware of in 500 years, we took a relic of St Andrew with our young people. We prayed a litany of the saints in the afternoon, in the wind and the rain and the rest of it. They came forward to venerate the relic, and I blessed them with it. And it was a wonderful occasion. And we had a great time. We had a lot of fun.
It strikes me, Archbishop Leo, I hope you don't mind me saying this, that the young people are ministering to you as much as you're ministering to them.
Yes, it's true. It's true. I often think that. I'm very encouraged by them. I just hope that I'm encouraging them as much as they're encouraging me.
Well, in terms of encouragement, if that's the problem, I is around how do we catechize and bring to fruition and maturity the Catholic Christian youth. What would be the means? What's the way in which you as a pastor, and you've got experience across the universal church, what's your sort of take on how we do that?
Yes. Well, what I find the young people asking me for is they want an unvarnished and version of Catholicism. Yes. They don't want me to make it easy for them. They don't want Catholicism light. It's somewhat to my surprise, perhaps, after my experience and after seeing the church in many countries. They want me to tell it like it is, and then they'll make up their own minds. I think this is slightly the difference between them and my own generation. We were much more comfortable and at ease and took the faith and our Christian cultural context for granted. They don't. But what they do is they want me to tell them what Catholicism is, and then they will make up their own minds. But what I am impressed by is how often they decide to grasp it and to go into it in depth and to make it an authentic part of their life. And that impresses me no end, especially given the present context.
It must be very challenging, though, as a shepherd, as a pastor of, you are the chief shepherd of this diocese, the successor of the apostles in this area. But it really puts the onus on you then to really lead
Yes. It's true. So I have to do that by example, as best I may, and also encourage my priests to do the same. A lot of priests think of themselves as, well, I'm a bit too old and I'm not very good at this, and they get shy and reticent, when in fact I think the age doesn't matter. You can still be a wonderful example. John Paul's just one example.
Absolutely.
Okay, he was the Pope, fair enough, but nonetheless, as a man in his 70s and in his 80s, he still had something to say to young people, and could also show that by the way he lived and the courageous way that he ended his life as well. And that can inspire young people too. It doesn't need to be young people talking to young people.
Absolutely. Do you have any insights into, because you must have met Pope John Paul II.
Yes.
He had an ability to connect with young people, which was almost preternatural.
He did.
Do you have any insights into what, other than the Holy Spirit, I mean, what was behind that?
I didn't know him that well, but I did work with him, but at a certain remove. But I did get to see him with people, and he had a goodness, a gentleness. He had a humour, I think, that came across, and it was intelligent, authentic Catholicism, but with a lot of heart, a lot of charity, and the legacy speaks for itself. That both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis continued that outreach to young people, and so I see a lot of wonderful momentum that is a legacy of John Paul and part of his spirit that we still have today.
I remember the BBC did a vox pop after John Paul II died, and it was obviously an English pilgrim they picked upon in St Peter's Square, and they said, "Why does he mean so much to you?" And she looked straight at the camera and said, "He told us the truth when everybody else was telling us lies."
About that, yes, that's wonderful, wonderful.
Now, we're sitting in Edinburgh, which is the capital of Scotland. It's a time of momentous change across the United Kingdom for different reasons. But if somebody was coming from, say, North America to visit this part of the world,
yes.
Archbishop Leo, where would you take them, or what would you show them as a kind of symbolic or the essence of what this diocese is about?
Well, there are two things I would do. One of them would be to be completely touristy about it and to take them up into Edinburgh Castle.
Yes.
Because in Edinburgh Castle you get the most wonderful view of the city.
That's true.
And down the Forth, the river, and across into the Kingdom of Fife, and it's beautiful in every direction, and you immediately get a sense of what the city and even the nation is like, since this is also the capital, the ancient capital of Scotland. But the highest building in it is also the oldest building in Edinburgh, and it is the Chapel of St Margaret.
Really?
And we think it was built just after her, in memory of her, by her son, King David, who also became a saint, as it happens. And it is a beautiful Norman chapel, and it's there to this day with lovely windows. The windows are Victorian, but they're charming. And one of them is of St Margaret herself at prayer in the castle. And it gathers up a lot of our history. I have a great devotion to St Margaret. I always did. And now I find myself with St Margaret, who is at the centre of the life of the diocese and even of the country. She's a great inspiration.
Could you, for the benefit of those who aren't familiar with her life, give a brief summary of who she is and when she lived?
St Margaret was an Anglo-Saxon princess who married the King of Scots, Malcolm III, in 1070. And she becomes the Queen of Scots, and she dies in 1093. And she had an enormous impact upon this country. Yes. She called councils of the church. She brought the politicians together. She dragged Scotland into the 11th century. But she did it with great Christian faith. And to this very day, we are still feeling the impact of her positive presence in this country. There are so many institutions named after St Margaret in this country, and they're about charity, and they're about reaching out to the poor. Right. Her biographer, who was also her confessor, Bishop Turley, one of my predecessors as Bishop of St Andrews, has left us a biography of her where he tells us the most wonderful stories of how she would get the royal kitchens to make lunch, and then they would throw out all the servants, and the king and the queen behind closed doors would serve the poor.
Wow.
Just one example. And many other things that she did, though, to bring the church gradually back into the European fold. It had lost, I think, a little bit of touch with what was going on. And at the time, the whole of Christendom was embracing the Gregorian reforms that took place, and that saw the church into the High Middle Ages, and one of its most important moments. And St Margaret helped to make that happen in Scotland. She had a wonderful impact on the country. And so that's one reason I would perhaps take them up to the top of Edinburgh Castle.
Well, I think that's probably good enough. I mean, it's fascinating when you're talking there about St Margaret, because would you say she encapsulates a sort of essence of the Scottish character, this kind of Scottish concern for the poor, for the hungry, and a way to organise it as well, which the Scottish are famous for, that sort of skill. But also she's a laywoman.
That's right, yes. A wife and mother. She's our secondary patron. Our national patron is St Andrew.
Yes.
Fine, apostle. We're very proud of St Andrew, and relics of St Andrew were brought to a place that now bears his name. And St Andrews is famous for its medieval papal foundation of a university, and as the home of golf with the R&A and all that. But it also was made famous originally by being the centre of the church in Scotland due to the relics of Andrew. But our secondary patron is Margaret, who is obviously a woman, a mother, a wife, and a wonderful example of how people in politics can have a positive impact for the good upon the whole of society.
Yes.
And we are still feeling the warmth and the radiance of St Margaret nearly 1,000 years later.
Does that fill you with a certain awe or a certain... I mean, it's 1,000 years and we're still talking about her. I mean, and in some ways, as you say, you're the successor of her biographer, but I guess you're also the successor of St Andrew in this part of the world, because you're the successor of the apostle.
Well, I suppose so. I suppose that's true. But yes, you're right. You're right to catch the enthusiasm that I have about St Margaret. There used to be a pilgrimage nationally every year in her honour that went on throughout the Middle Ages. It stopped after the Reformation. It started again in the 19th century. And it changed slightly in the 1970s after the council. And one of the first things that I decided to do on becoming Archbishop here was to start it again.
Really?
And so every year, every June in Dunfermline, where her body was buried, we take a relic of St Margaret solemnly through the streets of Dunfermline, and we celebrate Holy Mass in the afternoon. And from a standing start, hundreds and hundreds of people come from all over Scotland again to venerate St Margaret and to remember her with respect and affection. And the Kirk, the Church of Scotland, the Presbyterian Church here, has also started an ecumenical service remembering her in an extraordinary gesture of openness that we're very grateful to see as well. And so I hope we have started something afresh which recognises her and which inspires the rest of us to remember this wonderful legacy that we have at our disposal here.
One of the features of our time in Scotland has been, through the bishops, how knowledgeable they are of how deep Catholicism is within Scottish history, within Scottish culture, because most people assume Catholicism is a kind of modern, through Irish immigration, Italian immigration and such like in the industrial cities. But each bishop is able to point to different parts of their diocese and the long history that how do you, I mean, this is a wonderful way. Is this part of how you're bringing this history to life for Catholics today?
Yes, very much so. As far as I'm concerned, this is a story that started in the 4th century.
Yes.
With St Ninian.
Yes.
And it has continued ever since. St Columba in Iona that we share with the north of Ireland.
Yes.
A great missionary impetus as a result of those Irish monks and nuns who travelled the length and breadth of the British Isles and throughout Western Europe, either to preach or to preach again the good news, to great effect, and who are still remembered with extraordinary affection and tenacity by locals. St Boniface, the patron of Germany, yes. People like that. And some of the most important medieval monasteries were Irish foundations. St Gallen and Bobbio, and there are lots and lots of them. And I see us as part of that wonderful river. All that, those handshakes that go back and back and back and back, all the way back to our Lord himself, that we are part of that wonderful tradition. And so for me, it's very easy to draw attention to that, to take a little pride in it, but also to see that here we have an opportunity to let people see the good that was achieved for the betterment of our people and our country throughout the history, and to see that as a basis to go forward.
We started our conversation discussing the challenges that the Church faces today, and rightly you said there are many challenges, and bishops and archbishops see them more than most. But given your knowledge of history and your understanding of the salvation history, which is peppered through what most people consider to be history, does that give you a sort of sense of history, a sense of perspective about today's issues?
Perhaps. At least I often find myself saying, well, this is the way it was before, and we needed to face those challenges. I'm often struck as well by the fact that human nature has not changed.
Yes.
We are still the same as we were when our blessed Lord walked the earth. And so our human nature, frail and concupiscent as it is, has not changed. It still needs saving. It still needs encouragement. It still needs the grace of God in order to be saved. That the pride that our present culture expresses is misplaced.
Yes.
We just need to take a little look back over where we've come from to see that there are better ways of doing it than we're presently doing this.
Archbishop Leo, thank you very much for taking the time out to speak to us here in Edinburgh today, and look forward to maybe coming to Dunfermline sometime with you.
You'd be very welcome.
Thank you very much.